A lot of talks generally kind of talk around sort of knowledge and the diagnosis. I'm wanting to focus mostly in terms of what we can do. I'm going to be looking principally at the financial crisis, but actually, unlike the sort of the general documentary, which is 59 minutes of what happened, and then one last minute of what the seeds of what we might be able to do about it, I want to reverse that. Because I find more interesting the question, what is it we need to do on the basis of what we've learned? So I'm going to take you through the financial crisis in 90 seconds, because there's a bit of a speed trap for the talkers today. So wish me luck, and I am going to be on fast forward. So in the beginning, there were banks, and banks were lending money in their communities, and people trusted them, and for some odd reason they used to wear suits and funny hats, don't know why. Then they got bigger and they merged and they became public in the stock market, and in the boom years banks were suddenly trying to compete for capital against other kinds of companies, and they couldn't really do that within the realm of being a bank, because banks have to provide a social purpose, and to be able to stretch things within that model was very difficult. So what they did was they lobbied to get regulations relaxed, the very regulations which were keeping them to what they did, and those got blown apart to the extent that they started to do things which were not banking. They were starting to do things which were trading. They were starting to do things which in a way took them away from the very relationships which banks were there for. And so they started doing more and more of this stuff, the high short-term profit, more risky stuff, until there were hardly banks at all. In fact, globally systemic, the too big to fail banks are actually doing about 37% loan relationships, until they crashed. They crashed. Yes, there was a subprime, which was fraud. Yes, there was the CDO market, which was negligence. But all of those things are effects, not causes. People blamed the banks. They were all greedy, although the people down at the branches with their funny suits, they wouldn't have known what was really going on. The regulators, the ratings agencies, they were asleep on the job, but there were a set of complex rules. They didn't really understand how to apply them. The governments, they were seen as weak, although they realised that they needed banks in order to go to keep the economy alive. Fund managers were asleep on the job, and yet they said, well, it's fiduciary responsibility. We just need to create profits for people. And then people, us, the customers, and kind of owners of the bank, well, we don't have the time. I mean, it's hard times enough, and actually interest rates are pretty rubbish at the moment. So what can we do? So they nationalised some of the banks, and people said, oh, RBS, it's been taken over now, so now we're all bankers. Well, we were bankers before, in the sense that we all owned the banks before. Most of you would have owned them. I would guess that the majority of you wouldn't have known whether you owned it or not. But it wasn't clear. Governments have now taken over those banks. They're crumbling under the burden of debt, and everyone's hoping that Angela Merkel is going to sort it all out, like the sort of the ultimate grown-up after the kids have trashed the house of the party. So what is it we need to do? What is it we need to do? Well, the first thing is recognise it as a system. Yes, it's a complex system. There's lots of players within that system. Some of them have got dubious motivations. A lot of incentives within that system. Not many of them aligned, most of them in the short term. And it is a system which we are in. We are all fundamentally connected to it. Within the banking system, we are the other side of that. And the planet is a system. So I'm using the financial system as an analogy for the other things which we're wanting to be connected in. And not just because it seems to be a good analogy, but because money has a specific role to play within everything we do, in that it transforms ideas into action. Uniquely transforms ideas into action. Money in that sense is not neutral. The second thing in terms of recognising our opportunities for action is to step out of the cycle of blame. It's very, very easy to blame, and I empathise for all the causes for doing so. The bankers who were actually traders, because they don't deserve to be called bankers because they weren't having any relationships, earning £1 million, or the Fred Goodwins, do cause massive emotions, and so they should. However, just getting back at them by stripping of their knighthoods or name-calling doesn't actually really shift the system on. What we need to look at is, how can we actually re-engage with our own power? Well, what does it mean, our own power? We don't have much power in the system. We don't have much money. Or do we? For the average person, the median salary being about £20,000 at the moment in the UK, We look at those bankers, traders of £1 million with rage, and yet for the majority world who are earning a couple of dollars a day, the ratio between our 20,000 and their salary is actually the same ratio between the £1 million trader banker and ours. And therefore, actually, collectively, we have got a lot of power. I'm not saying that the blame needs to rest with us, but I am saying that we have to fundamentally redress what we can actually do as individuals. And I think that's what started the conversation at Occupy. There, the conversation was, what's wrong? And people wanted to just understand what's wrong. And I think we've been wrestling with this for a while now, and we need to move it on and actually ask the question, what's next? The starting point for what's wrong is, well, what's going on with this system? I can't fathom it out. And there's CDOs, and are they like lending to somebody else? And then there's derivatives, and there's something quite complicated. It's enough to make you just go home. It is very, very disempowering. And actually, I would argue it's not a good starting point for us. The people who move things on most in the world, understanding the absolute complexity of the system that they're in is not actually their starting point. Entrepreneurs don't start there. They will actually take creative ideas and say, hey, actually, rather than making buildings out of brick in a different way, how about we make them out of straw bale? How about if you were to recycle products into things which are more useful? How about if you do things which are actually not the norm? There's an awful lot of vision and will and solutions within entrepreneurial thinking, whether that's in the private sector or in other sectors, in social enterprise or in charities indeed. The entrepreneurs take the thing, how can we be part of the solution and how can we be responsible for managing it? How can we stand up and say, I will take my share of responsibility in managing it? We are, as Triodos, incredibly humbled to be able to support these people who are trying to create new ideas, what we feel are the solutions which are addressing the challenges of society and the planet. How do we do that? Well, if you go back to what bankers used to be in their socially useful purpose, there's a triangle I'd like you to imagine. The entrepreneur comes with the will and the vision and the idea and the responsibility to take charge of a situation and create a solution. The banker, in its best form, is there to be able to ground that, to be able to understand it, to understand the risk on behalf of people who won't have the time, to be able to make sure that things are in balance from a commercial point of view, because in order to be healthy from a planetary and a social point of view, it also has to be healthy from a practical point of view. And to complete the triangle, all of our money, the thing which turns the ideas into action, is required to be able to make things happen in the world. That's something which can be quite energizing and something that we've been able to be a part of in things like growing markets in renewable energy. When I started 14 years ago or so in renewable energy was alternative. It was not something of the future, it was something of the something else. And yet, through being able to craft it and be able to grind it down into, well, how does this work? How does the commercial things fit together? How do these contracts work? What is the health of the system from a practical point of view? It was able to develop into a market which then others come into, others then spot and will come into, maybe just because it's more profitable to do so, but it's being able to make that something which is grounded, that we can then move on and create more solutions. And that's more important, being able to take a relationship with entrepreneurs, so folk at Ecotricity or wherever, where they've started from small roots and are now sort of in that train, that there are the proven models, that we can actually kind of move things on. That's actually more important than being able to say, well, we've done this much renewable energy. It's being able to be a footprint for that activity that we can go on and replicate, and then other people can go, well, okay, we can use that too. Now you might say, well, hang on a second, this is all about growth. Well, we're a bit unsure about growth. And so you should be, because in a way, there's been a whole kind of ideal about growth equals good. And we've come to learn that that isn't right. Making the cake bigger is somehow just not fulfilling us. but neither is retraction. If you went to Greece at the moment, the opposite of growth doesn't feel particularly good either. We don't need to make the cake bigger, we need to make it more nutritious, and we need to make it in such a way that it sustains itself. And because there's going to be natural decline, because an awful lot of what we have built is based on very, very shaky foundations, it's going to fall over and not be with us, we need to be able to build and grow a new alternative. How do we do this in a new way? One of the main things which we need to do is look at ownership. If you go right back to my analysis, that primal cause of the financial crisis, somewhere in that interface of ownership, everyone was kind of doing it for someone else's benefit. And we're somewhere within that, although a sort of a passenger within a very complex vehicle. But there's more forms of active ownership now. There's cooperatives, there's peer lending, there's organisations who are entirely designed to be transparent and to include you. There's direct investments in companies, be they social or environmental, who actually want participation of stakeholders because they've actually kind of built that into their business model. I think that owning banks, because of the social purpose that banks play, should be a different type of ownership. We should not be comparing it to owning a technology, which may or may not become something which transforms. This is something which is fundamental to us. Ownership is no longer a good enough word for what we need to have as the relationship to banks. Alongside others in the Global Alliance, there's lots of banks and credit unions, microfinance organisations who are working to try and reconnect people to values and have a new experience, to be able to put people in the picture so that they reconceive money not as something which is neutral, nor as a commodity, but something which actually plays the fundamental role in defining their relationship with other people. This is what I'm going to be able to do with my money, which brings your ideas into action, because I need your ideas to be brought into action in order to serve my future. Last point, because I know we're short of time, is looking at the incentives which are in the system and being able to drive us towards something which is long-term. Everything in the system at the moment is short-term. Banks are short-term, super short-term. Trading used to happen on the stock market. People used to hold shares for 8 years. The average is now around 3 months, although there's hedge funds who can trade within milliseconds. You can potentially get to the point where trading systems can go into picoseconds, a trillionth of a second. Everything moves at high speed. But then governments move at high speed too, and they will follow. And in fact, well, we all move at high speed now as well. Where can you break the cycle of being able to get incentives which aren't just being able to do the necessary things, like in the natural capital declaration, we're going to be able to reprice natural resources so that we can make it more profitable to do things which are better for the planet. But how can we actually do things where our entire operating system means that we're incentivized to do things in a more balanced way rather than only accepting that profits will be in the lead? And I think that there's certain things there by incentivizing community investment, loyalty dividends, we can actually start to move some of the thinking towards the long term. We can maybe start to rephrase some of the language which we have. Rainy day money is always based around fear. It's the fear of the future, so we'll put some money by because money might just protect us. However, the money that we keep there, earning as much interest as we can because we need to be protected, is being kept driven into the very system which is causing a lot of the things which we, in the news pages, realise that is what is ailing our society, and is driving us down quicker in the same way as we struggle in quicksand and we drown faster. Perhaps we need to have happy day money, where we put money aside to create the vision of the world which we actually want to live on, and actually that will mean that our money has some kind of meaning in the future, because it'll be no good having a pension if we can't spend it in the world. In the Netherlands, they're recognising that they need to build an infrastructure. It's quite easy when you've got a country which is 4 metres under sea level on average, that they have to start investing in what they have to do, because it's no good just creating a sum of money if the entire country is underwater. I think my call to action is that we all recognise that this microcosm that we have of passing things on, waiting for the grown-ups to arrive, which we'll see in Rio, where we're hoping that the governments or international government will somehow miraculously waltz into the room and sort us out for us, is not going to happen, and it's time for us to take charge. Yes, I would like you to put some happy day money with us, but the biggest thing I'd like you to do is to socialize this concept, is to have the conversations. People will act differently and more positively when things are unseen. Money has been our greatest secret and our greatest fear. And so my challenge to you is to start integrating it into the sustainability debate and to have the conversations which we need to have as to how it all binds together. Thanks very much.